It was 10:30 p.m. on a cold December night in 2019. Hidden inside a box, Carlos Ghosn, once a powerful leader in the global car industry, lay still on board a private jet. He was moments away from an escape that would shock the world. The jet was set to take off at 11 p.m., but for Ghosn, each minute in that box felt like an eternity. He could do nothing but wait, knowing that every passing second was filled with risk. It was the longest 30 minutes of his life. But why was the CEO of one of the world's leading car companies, a global powerhouse, Nissan, forced to escape in the dead of night, hidden inside a box? Just a year before, Carlos Ghosn was celebrated as a visionary, the man who saved Nissan from collapse and transformed the global car industry. Yet here he was, fleeing like a fugitive. What led to this dramatic fall from grace? What had pushed one of the most powerful men in business to such desperate measures? To answer all these questions, we need to rewind to his earlier days. Carlos Ghosn was born in 1954 to Lebanese migrants in Brazil. They would later migrate to France when he was a young boy, where he would spend his formative years. He earned an engineering degree from the esteemed École Polytechnique, followed by a graduate degree from the renowned École des Mines, setting the stage for a remarkable career. Afterwards, he landed an administrative job at Michelin, a renowned French tire company. Ghosn quickly distinguished himself as a dedicated worker, climbing the ranks through sheer determination and sharp analytical skills. His hard work paid off when he became the chief of the American division of Michelin, a prestigious position within the company. During his tenure, Ghosn forged a close relationship between Michelin and Renault, the largest French car manufacturer at the time. His impressive success at Michelin caught the attention of the then Renault's CEO, Louis Schweitzer, who offered him a role as his deputy. Renault was in dire straits, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, but Ghosn saw this as a challenge he could tackle. Within a year of joining Renault, Ghosn transformed the company's fortunes. He adopted a no-nonsense approach, eliminating inefficiencies and excesses that had plagued the organization. This involved restructuring the company, which unfortunately meant closing several factories and laying off thousands of workers. This drastic measure earned him the nickname the cost killer from the French media, highlighting his relentless focus on profitability. Despite the controversies, Ghosn's strategies revitalized Renault, steering it back to profitability and even stronger than before. His success fueled his ambition to expand Renault's influence in the global automotive market, especially against formidable competitors like Ford and Toyota. To achieve this, Ghosn set his sights on Nissan, a well-known Japanese company that was facing significant crisis. At the time, the company was drowning in $20 billion of debt, with only a handful of its car models turning a profit and no bank willing to lend them. Ghosn recognized the potential for a powerful alliance. In a bold move, Renault offered to buy a substantial stake in Nissan, which would give them controlling interest. This was no small feat. Traditionally, Japanese companies like Nissan were known for their strong sense of national pride and reluctance to allow foreign control. Despite this, Nissan was in desperate need of help, and Ghosn stepped in, pledging to turn things around within a year and clear the debt in just 3 years. And in 1999, Renault acquired 37% of Nissan, making Ghosn the CEO, a groundbreaking move, as no Japanese company of that size had ever been led by a foreigner. Carlos Ghosn, a foreign head at Nissan, wasted no time upon arriving in Japan. He visited each of Nissan's factories and quickly crafted an integrated strategy to rescue the company from its dire situation, similar to his successful overhaul of Renault. His plan was bold. 5 factories were shut down, leading to significant layoffs and sizable protests from workers, sparking a massive public campaign against the alliance of Nissan and Renault. Despite the backlash, Ghosn remained undeterred, making decisions that defied Japanese traditions. To begin with, he declared English the company's official language to facilitate global expansion, and secondly replaced the seniority-based promotion system with a result-based promotion. These drastic changes earned Ghosn both admirers and enemies, particularly among Nissan's administration. However, the strategies proved effective, leading to substantial achievements for Nissan and a swift return to profitability within a year. His reputation transformed from that of a foreign killer to a rescuer, earning him accolades and making him a celebrated figure in Japan and beyond. Ghosn's image was so revered that he received standing ovations when entering restaurants, and his story even inspired a Japanese novel that sold over 1 million copies. By 2005, when Renault's CEO retired, Ghosn assumed leadership of both Renault and Nissan, a historic feat that placed immense pressure on him. Despite family advice to resign from one position, he refused, determined to lead the alliance. Ghosn's annual salary of $17 million, though not unprecedented by foreign CEO standards, was strikingly high by Japanese norms, 11 times greater than Toyota's CEO salary, inviting envy and resentment among his peers and even within Nissan's board. Living a lavish lifestyle, Ghosn threw extravagant parties, owned luxury items, and traveled by private jet, further alienating him from Japanese customs that favor modesty. On November 19th, however, everything changed. After a meeting with Nissan's board in Paris, Ghosn flew to Tokyo, only to be greeted by Japanese police at the airport. A stunning turn of events that sent shockwaves through the automotive industry. No explanations was given, leaving him helpless and confused, ultimately leading to his incarceration. The media quickly seized upon the story, launching into an avalanche of coverage that highlighted every detail of Ghosn's life and career. Headlines blared, and news outlets competed to report on the unfolding drama. Meanwhile, as the public scrutiny intensified, Nissan's stock value began to plummet, reflecting investor fears and the uncertainty surrounding the company's future. In this chaotic environment, Ghosn waited in vain for support from Nissan, the company he had once transformed into a global powerhouse. Unfortunately, the backing he hoped for was conspicuously absent, leaving him feeling isolated and betrayed by an organization he had dedicated his career to. He would later discover that the board had appointed an interim president who announced Ghosn's removal after an internal investigation revealed alleged corruption associated with him. Shocked by the betrayal, Ghosn maintained his innocence, asserting the charges were fabricated. Central to the allegations was the claim that he failed to declare earnings tied to a retirement fund intended for his pension, a matter he argued was beyond his control since the amount had not been finalized. Yet, Japanese authorities saw it as financial fraud. His situation grew increasingly dire, culminating in a 3-month stint in solitary confinement in a harsh prison, an extraordinary treatment for someone not accused of violent crimes. Meanwhile, Nissan's board continued its defamation campaign, accusing Ghosn of misusing company funds to purchase properties in Paris, Beirut, and Brazil. Ghosn countered that these properties were known to the board and utilized for business purposes due to his dual CEO role. Carlos steadfastly denied all accusations against him, and after 3 months of detention, the Tokyo court granted him bail, set at 1 billion yen, equivalent to about $9 million. Unsurprisingly, Carlos could afford to pay it, as that was about half his annual salary. Once released, he emerged from prison amidst a flurry of media attention, with journalists trailing him until he reached his apartment. Over the next few days, his house was surrounded by journalists, which made it practically impossible to freely move around. Not to mention the paparazzi, their hawk-eyed lenses trained relentlessly on his home. Unwilling to back down, Ghosn took to Twitter, announcing that on April 11, 2019, he would reveal a conspiracy against him orchestrated by the government and the Nissan board. However, this only escalated his situation. Less than 24 hours after announcing the event, Japanese authorities surrounded his apartment and arrested him for a second time. Despite having paid bail, Carlos was taken back into custody. His lawyers anticipated this scenario and had prepared a video as a contingency plan. In this video, he articulated his belief that the accusations were not merely about financial misconduct. Rather, they were part of a larger scheme orchestrated by those within Nissan. He claimed that fears over a potential merger had ignited a revolt among Nissan executives, ultimately leading to his ouster from the global automotive alliance he had once led, which included Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi Motors. After spending 21 more days in prison, Carlos was released on bail again, this time paying nearly $5 million, bringing his total bail amount to a staggering $14 million. The conditions for his release were unusual. Japanese authorities confiscated his Lebanese and Brazilian passports, allowing him to retain only his French identity document. He was also forbidden from leaving the country, and they seized all his personal devices, including his laptop and phone. The most peculiar condition was a permanent ban on communication with his wife and family. Any attempt to contact them would result in immediate arrest. Sensing the ill intentions of the authorities, Carlos instructed his lawyers to inform his wife to return to Beirut in a bid to shield his family from the escalating turmoil. At this point, he had grown increasingly convinced that he would not receive fair treatment in Japan, where the prosecution boasted a staggering 99.4% conviction rate in cases like his, making it nearly impossible to win against them. As Carlos felt the walls closing in on him, he began to realize that his chances of getting a fair trial in Japan were growing slimmer by the day. It was time to consider a daring escape. After his release on bail, he took refuge in a modest apartment in Tokyo, awaiting his trial. Although free to move within the country, he knew he needed a plan. The first step was acquiring a phone, but not just any phone, a secure one that the Japanese authorities wouldn't detect. He paid a hefty sum to obtain it illegally, knowing it was crucial for his communications. Carlos would then use this phone to make calls in the privacy of the bathroom, ensuring he wasn't being watched. But a pressing question remained. Who were the mysterious contacts aiding him in this high-stakes game? The identities of these individuals have never been disclosed, as revealing them could put them in peril. All that was known was that Carlos had assembled a small team, between 10 to 15 people, within Japan, dedicated to orchestrating his escape. Initially, the group considered fleeing by sea, but the route to Lebanon would take far too long. The second option was air travel, yet Carlos faced a significant hurdle. He was forbidden to leave Japan. The challenge was monumental. How could he board a plane without raising suspicion? His team set out to find an airport with fewer security measures. They scoured various airports, discovering that most had stringent protocols. However, they eventually pinpointed a small airport in Osaka, which appeared to have a critical loophole. At this airport, large boxes, like those used to transport musical instruments, were exempt from X-ray inspections. The team devised an audacious plan: smuggle Carlos Ghosn out of Japan by hiding him in one of these oversized boxes. The ruse involved two men posing as a music band, flying in from their private jet, ostensibly carrying their instruments for a concert in Tokyo before jetting off to Istanbul for another show. The identities of these two would-be musicians were later revealed. One, Mike Taylor, was a former American Special Forces soldier, and his son, George Zyke. These were the men tasked with the daunting responsibility of sneaking Carlos Ghosn out of Japan. At first, Carlos hesitated, doubting the feasibility of this outrageous plan, but he quickly realized he had no viable alternatives. However, he faced another obstacle. His home was under constant surveillance. Although free to move, a trip to Osaka would surely raise suspicions. As these plans were underway, Carlos began to notice figures lurking near his house, possibly affiliated with the Japanese authorities. Concerned, he sought advice from his lawyer, who confirmed that such surveillance was illegal, yet proving it would be impossible. In a moment of ingenuity, Carlos's lawyer suggested they invite journalists to report on his situation, hoping that the media attention would confuse the informants and drive them away. Carlos reached out to several journalists, and upon their arrival, he observed a remarkable change. The informants vanished, knowing that their presence could be scandalous. After a few hours, the journalists left, and to Carlos's dismay, the informants returned to their posts. Realizing the pattern, Carlos concluded that if he wanted the informants to disappear, he needed to keep calling in journalists to create a smokescreen. After several tense days of planning, the smuggling team settled on December 29, 2019, as the date for their operation. When the day came, Carlos knew his foreign status and features would draw attention. Fortunately, it was winter. He donned a large jacket, a winter hat, and a mask, common attire in Japan, helping him to blend in and conceal his identity as he moved through the streets. He then invited the journalists again to his home, and with the informants distracted once more, Carlos made his move. He slipped out of his house and headed to the Grand Hyatt Hotel, where he would meet Mike and George. They quickly held a meeting and shared crucial advice on maintaining a low profile until they reached the airport at Osaka, a distance close to 500 kilometers. At the hotel, a van was waiting, which they quickly boarded, and soon they were on their way. The journey to Osaka was uneventful, and within 6 hours they had arrived. Once in Osaka, they checked into a hotel where the crucial smuggling box awaited. Carlos changed into fresh clothes and settled in, covered by a cloth to disguise him as a mere instrument. The box was loaded onto a truck along with legitimate box carrying musical instruments and headed for the airport. Once at the airport, they started unpacking the boxes. Ghosn could not tell much, but suspense was high. He could hear Mike and George murmuring in low voices, their tones tense but steady. The boxes were carried carefully towards the check-in point, and with every movement, the gravity of the moment pressed down on him more. Carlos strained to hear conversations as they moved through customs. He, however, could overhear Mike speaking to a customs officer, casually discussing their concert and expressing gratitude for cooperation. By this time, Mike and George were pretty familiar with the airport routines, having entered Japan through the same airport just hours earlier. As the customs officials inquired about the contents of the boxes, Mike and George confidently explained that they contained musical instruments. They insisted the boxes had already been checked that morning upon their entry, smoothly assuring the officials that they were simply taking their equipment out after their concert in Tokyo. The customs staff, satisfied with the explanation, didn't think twice. As long as the boxes had been checked before, there was no need for further inspection, especially since the musicians were flying on their private jet to Istanbul for their next concert. Carlos could hear the casual banter of the customs officers nearby. One of them joked, "These two guys are most likely smuggling beautiful girls inside the boxes." Carlos felt a mix of tension and humor at the absurdity of the situation. He remained silent in the confines of the box, straining to hear every detail as they approached the final exit. The boxes were quickly loaded into the trucks, and soon they were on their way to the private jet. But as they thought they had navigated all the hurdles, A security officer stopped them. Panic surged through Carlos. Would they discover the plan? Mike greeted the officer with a smile, presenting the necessary paperwork. "Just a quick turnaround for our next concert in Istanbul," he explained casually. The officer glanced at the documents, then at the boxes, and nodded. "Enjoy your flight," he said, waving them through. Mike and George immediately started loading the boxes from the truck to the plane. Carlos could feel as they climbed up the plane stairs, and the feeling a mix of joy and suspense, not sure if another hurdle might present. Once inside, Mike and George swiftly unloaded the boxes, and Carlos emerged from his cramped hiding spot. The cabin was plush and comfortable, a stark contrast to the confinement he had just escaped. As the plane taxied down the runway, Carlos reflected on the whirlwind of events that had led him here. They were leaving Japan behind, but the threat of extradition still loomed over him. With the roar of the engines and the sensation of lift, he felt a rush of exhilaration mixed with fear. They were airborne, but the journey was far from over. They had to ensure they reached Turkey without an incident. After landing in Istanbul, Carlos was quickly taken to another waiting plane on the runway, which immediately headed to Beirut without entering the airport. The short flight lasted about an hour, and upon arrival, a customs officer recognized him. His name was well known in Lebanon, and the local support for him was evident. The officer welcomed Carlos and congratulated him on his arrival, making him feel safe for the first time since his escape. He was soon reunited with his wife and family, and news of his escape spread rapidly across the globe. Meanwhile, Japanese authorities were in an uproar, issuing an Interpol arrest warrant for Carlos and blaming his lawyers for negligence, despite it not being their responsibility to monitor him. Lebanon, however, does not extradite its citizens, making it clear that they would support and protect Carlos. Shortly after, Carlos held a significant press conference in Beirut, where he explained his situation to the world and defended himself, asserting that he had not escaped from justice, but from a lack of it.
I was left with no other choice but to protect myself and my family. It was a difficult decision.
Lebanese authorities offered to handle the case, suggesting that Carlos could face trial in Lebanon, but Japanese officials refused the proposal and continued seeking his extradition. After Carlos Ghosn's escape, attention turned to his associates, Mike and his son George, who faced serious consequences. Upon returning to the U.S., both were extradited to Japan. In the Japanese judicial system, they were held accountable for their roles in the events surrounding Ghosn's case. Mike was sentenced to 2 years in prison, while George received a sentence of 1 year and 8 months. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to drop a comment, hit the like button, and subscribe for more amazing content like this. See you in the next one.